Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight for this virtual meeting for the Rivermont Avenue Safety Improvement Study and Design Project. This meeting will be recorded, or it is being recorded, and the recording will be available in the next day or so on the city's website. And the format of this meeting tonight is we're going to go through a PowerPoint presentation to let you know about the project. Then we are going to have a question and answer session after that. And on the next slide, I'll tell you a little bit about the controls. Oh, I'm sorry, this is the slide after this. First of all, I want to let you know who is in the room with you as the panel. So these are the people who will be available to answer questions and respond to your comments and input. From the city of Lynchburg, we have the project manager for this project, Ryan Roberts. Also have Victoria Glasgow and Eve Mergenthaler. Hopefully I said that right, Eve. And they're with the planning department. From Hurt and Profit is the lead design engineer on this project, and that's Mike Johnson. We'll hear from Mike in a few minutes. My name is Bill Winch. I'm with the firm EPR. We are assisting with the public involvement process and some of the traffic analysis. And with me tonight from EPR is Phil White, one of our lead planners. So a little bit about the controls in this virtual meeting. And hopefully we are close to being at the end of having to do these virtually. But this is where we are today. On the left of this slide is information that you should have received when you registered. Should have been in your email. And what I want to point out is that if you have dialed in using your phone to hear and talk instead of doing it through the computer, when we get to the question and answer session, you're going to have to click that join webinar button, even though you're dialed in, and that will allow your voice to come through. So that's important to know if you're dialed in. On the right side here, you see some of the control buttons. And right now, everybody's muted, but at the end of the meeting, you'll be unmuted. You can self-mute, but you can mute and unmute using the microphone button there. You can type questions in the question box down below. Hopefully you see that. And at any time during the presentation, you can type a question in. We're going to hold those till the end, but we'll read them back and then respond to the questions and input at that time. Also, during the question and answer period, if you don't want to use the question, type a question box there, you can also weigh in with your voice. We're happy to interact that way as well. That's a little about the controls. Okay, some information about this project. This is the Bedford Avenue corridor. You see in this graphic here. And Bedford Avenue, as I'm sure you all know as attendees and city residents and other interested parties, intersects with Rivermont Avenue on both ends of Bedford Avenue. So it's sort of a cut-through road, but it's also provides access to businesses and neighborhoods and people who want to walk and bicycle. So it's an important road in this part of the city. In 2018, the city commissioned a study of the Bedford Avenue, Rivermont Avenue intersection on the east end, closer into the city there, to look at concerns about vehicle crashes and pedestrian safety and really the overall safety condition of the intersection. And throughout this presentation, we have a couple of polls we're going to put up on the screen, and there's a couple purposes here. One is to get your feedback on some questions, but also to get you comfortable interacting on the computer in this virtual format. So at this point, Phil will put a poll up on the screen, and if you can take a minute and reply to it, we would appreciate it. So what is your familiarity with the study intersection? Please take a minute and click the right circle there. That applies to you.
Just waiting for a few more votes.
Okay, thank you all for participating in that. It looks like the majority of you live within a couple blocks of the intersection. Some of you pass through the intersection, perhaps on your commute or things you do around town, and others, visit the destination, but are familiar with the corridor there. So thank you. Thanks for participating in that poll. Now for the next slide, Mike Johnson with Hurt and Profit will describe the rest of the presentation to you.
Thank you, Bill. As Bill said, my name is Mike Johnson. I'm going to be the design engineer for the improvements. We'll also oversee the actual construction, which is going to be a big part of this project. Wanted to go through kind of the background of the project to where we are today, and then where we're going moving forward from here. As Bill said, in 2018, we had a traffic study done of the intersection. What you see on the screen to the right is the recommendations of that study. Based on the fact that 25% of those northbound turns go left onto Bedford Avenue, and almost all of the traffic coming off of Bedford Avenue is turning right or southbound onto Rivermont. The recommendations for safety improvements at the intersection included this median that cuts off the left-hand turns off of Rivermont and off of the two approaches of Bedford Avenue. This recommendation was used for the federal funding grant. Phil, do you mind going to the next slide for me? So the project, based off of that study, scored very well on VDOT Smart Scale funding application. The funds are already in-house in Lynchburg, and we're moving forward with the design of the improvements. To the left are the peak hour counts, which basically just means during the biggest 1 hour of turning movements of the day, this is what you see. From the Bedford Avenue side, we have less than 10 turns per hour, with the exception of that cut-through traffic going on to Rivermont. On the right-hand side, because this has a strong kind of localized grid for traffic to find their way around, they've kind of redistributed those left turns out onto Cable Street and Ruffner Place. And that's what the blue and the orange are on the right-hand side. Because this project scored so well on the federal funding, we're kind of limited to the improvements that were made in the traffic study. So I know we've had a couple of questions about traffic signal at this intersection. One, we have the limitations of the funding application, and two, when you evaluate it based off the federal standards for a traffic signal warrant, we would actually do more harm to this intersection if we were to signalize it, because it reduces the amount of traffic that can move through the intersection, and we would expect very long delays on Rivermont for traffic trying to go through. So the typical process for these state-funded and federally funded projects is you conduct your study. You usually have some sort of a funding application that can take 1 to 2 years to get through that process. Once you get your funding acquired, then you start with the design. We begin with survey, go through public involvement meetings, and then finally narrow that down to a final design and then we move on to the construction phase. We are just now beginning the design phase. What we're going to show in this meeting are a few of the conceptual designs. We haven't put a lot of detailed work into them, so some of the geometry is a little awkward and not real smooth, but once we narrow it down to a final concept, then we'll finalize all of that design. So some of the design elements we're looking at in the upper right-hand corner is kind of a traffic engineer graphic. It shows all the different conflict points that are potential at an intersection. In that 2018 study, all of the blue dots there were conflict points that were removed by reducing those left-hand turns moving across the intersection. It allows the primary movements to still flow, but eliminates some of the unnecessary conflicts where we're looking at 3 and 4 vehicles per hour making the movements. The crash data is from 2014 to 2020, and that's reported through the state police on the virginiaroads.org website. We had 9 property damage injuries or property damage accidents. There were 11 minor injuries and 2 what they consider a severe injury that occurred within the vicinity of the intersection. What we're looking at for the actual design, we have a WV50 tractor trailer that we're trying to get through the intersection, making the left onto Bedford and then the right back onto Rivermont to that bypass. And that's about a 53-foot long tractor trailer. It's a little smaller than most of the tractor trailers that you would see out on the interstate, but a little bigger than the ones you normally would see moving through a downtown area. And as you can see, that inside turning radius needs to be almost 50 feet in order to make it around that corner at the Exxon station. Some of the other design elements, of course, are the pedestrian safety. We conducted a pedestrian count where we went out for 12 hours, counted all the pedestrians moving through the intersection. We've got a summary of those results there. The red numbers are the number of pedestrians that used each of those crosswalks during that 12-hour period. We also had 34 pedestrians who were crossing what we call a mid-block, where they have an unprotected crossing over Rivermont, kind of coming into the south side of that Exxon gas station. We also put pneumatic tubes on the ground and calculated the 85th percentile speed. That's normally the speed that you would use for design of vertical curves and intersections and entrances. And that 85th percentile speed came out at 38 miles an hour. And we did note that the road is currently marked at 35 miles per hour. If you're interested in the distribution of the pedestrian traffic, that little graph on the bottom just kind of shows how many pedestrians there were in the intersection during each of those 15-minute count periods. The sight distance, the picture up on the upper right, as you come into one of those crosswalks and you're standing in the curb ramp, we want to make sure that there's adequate sight distance for pedestrians to be able to analyze their movements, make it all the way across the road, and we'll talk about how we're accommodating some of that on Rivermont when we get to the conceptual designs. But we also need to account for vehicles pulling up to the stop bars behind those crosswalks and being able to adequately see down Rivermont in order to make those turning maneuvers. So, and we also have one more poll here. The question we're wanting to know is, how do you typically travel through this intersection? Are you a pedestrian? Are you driving through a vehicle? Are you a cyclist? We also have a bus stop right there in the corner of the intersection that we'll have to accommodate into our designs.
So we've got most of the votes. Waiting for about a quarter of the votes. Just wait a few more seconds.
So I'm assuming they were able to vote on multiple options.
Yeah.
So I see 15% there for the cycling. When I was out on the site visit, had a few cyclists who were coming through the intersection as well. So we're trying to accommodate that, the cyclists, as they go through that intersection, making Rivermont kind of a continuous corridor. So as I mentioned before, we're at a very rough conceptual design phase. We have some general design criteria that we're trying to meet with these designs. For the three options we have, just to help orient yourselves, we have the old firehouse on the upper right corner of this display. The Exxon station is kind of right there in the middle. You can see the little gray X right next to where it says Exxon gas station. And then the Gospel Community Church is on the left side. So as you move from right to left, you're going northbound on Rivermont Avenue. The yellow will be a concrete median island that's intended to channelize traffic. It also has yellow in there for the curb ramps, where we're going to be modifying or improving those so they can better meet the ADA standards. This is what we've termed as option A. It was kind of the first pass at attempting to channelize the traffic, limit those conflict points, and accommodate bicyclists. You can see we've got bike lanes going northbound and southbound through the intersection. We're using a mountable curb to channelize those left turns. The mountable curb you may have heard as a roll-up curve. It's kind of smooth and doesn't really hit your tires hard when you roll up on it. So it allows trailers and other things that are being pulled behind vehicles to kind of go up and over the curb without damaging tires. We do have a refuge island on the north side of the intersection. That's a 6-foot wide median island that's intended for pedestrians to be able to walk out. They're only dealing with one direction of traffic at a time, and then they have a protected space that they can evaluate the rest of the maneuver across Rivermont. We have realigned 2 of the crosswalks, the Eastern Bedford crosswalk and the Northern Rivermont crosswalk, to make them more in line with the sidewalks and to better accommodate those curb ramps. Some of the issues in our design criteria that are not addressed by this option, of course, is the eastbound Bedford Avenue sight distance. You can see the stop bar down by the cemetery is still right in the middle of that intersection with McDonald Street. That's where it's currently located. Or I guess there isn't a stop bar there, but that's where you technically would stop. And the church kind of obscures the sight distance as you're trying to make that right-hand turn. There's also the conflict with McDonald Street. Traffic moving to Bedford from McDonald have a stop control, but they're going to be right in the middle of that intersection when they pull up. And the geometry is very awkward, and we have some irregular lane widths as we try to widen out to accommodate the median island and then narrowing back in an attempt to preserve as much of the on-street parking as possible. We had a few other options that were kind of in the middle. We've kind of narrowed those out a little bit, so we're going to go into option D. We haven't missed anything. That's just the kind of the iteration that we went through in the process so far. This option, in order to standardize the lane widths and still accommodate as much of that on-street parking, we switched to a shared through lane for bicyclists. The little squiggles in there that you can see on the pavement are a Shero. It's a bike emblem with 2 chevrons on top. And basically that allows cyclists to utilize the lane width as they're riding through the corridor. We've maintained that pedestrian refuge island. It's a little wider than it is in option A. We've realigned the same 2 crosswalks, and we've added a little bit of green space where you've got about 15 to 20 feet of concrete at the bus stop, and that would probably facilitate moving the bus stop somewhere else on Rivermont, because if they stop at that point with the islands the way they are, there's not going to be any way for traffic to continue flowing. What this doesn't address is sight distance at Bedford, making the right-hand turn, the same issue that we had with McDonald Street being in the middle of the intersection. And then our next iteration is option D. This one continues with the shared lanes. We've also widened out the receiving lane on the north side of the intersection. So as you approach that large concrete island that's going to have the vertical curves, you've got a little bit of extra lane width to move through, but that will produce some traffic calming. The traffic that's moving at 38 miles an hour now is going to be slowing down as it starts to navigate through this intersection. We still have the same pedestrian refuge island, a little bit of different geometry, and we're actually realigning all 3 of the crosswalks. The crosswalk on the east side of the intersection, I'm sorry, on the west side of the intersection, there at the bottom of your screen, is going to come up right in line with the sidewalk on Rivermont Avenue, which allows us to move the stop bar on Bedford Avenue forward, which increases that sight distance a little bit. And we're also going to look at converting McDonald Street into a one-way street so that traffic can turn right off of Bedford, but there won't be any left-hand turns coming off. This one addresses all of our design components, but actually while I was looking at it this afternoon, I realized that we may have some issues with the delivery vehicle for the Exxon gas station, which we do need to accommodate as we move forward with the final design. So that's just kind of a summation of where we are now. We've already received some feedback from a few of the residents who live right there in the vicinity of the intersection, and we would appreciate any comments or questions that you have at this point. So I think, Phil, you said that you can go into the chat, type your questions, and we can read and respond to those.
Yeah, it looks like a few questions came in while we were presenting. I'll go ahead and start reading those and let you answer them. The first one is, well, before I begin, just to note that I've unmuted everyone, all the attendees, but you have to unmute yourself if you're on the computer, by clicking that little red icon next to your name, or if you're on your phone.
Hi, I'm Martha Ballou. I live on Rivermont at the corner of Early Street, so I'm 2 blocks from this intersection. I frankly don't care what you do there. What I'm worried about is Rivermont has become a freeway. And I moved here at the end of October. We've had 4 major league accidents right in front of my house in that amount of time. One of them were fatal. 2 of them required ambulances and hospitalization. This is an extremely dangerous street, and it looks like you did a nice job on this intersection, but it also looks like you've turned, the rest of Rivermont into a freeway. You've got to do traffic slowing here because it's really, really dangerous here. So the more traffic you put on Rivermont that has, permission to go fast, they don't go 35 or 38 miles an hour. I watch this every day. They're easily going 40, 45, 50. It's tremendously dangerous. And I'm at the corner of Early Street, and Early Street is a 5-way intersection. So you've got both ways on Rivermont. You've got Early up and down, and you've got another one that I don't know the name of. So you've got, as part of this, you've got to think out your downstream traffic, because it looks really smooth and beautiful what you've done, but we're going to end up with a worse mess than we've got now. And right on the tree on my boulevard is a memorial to one of the people who was killed in the traffic accident. We all know how different. Dane?
Martha, did we lose you?
Oh, you muted me.
I'm sorry about
That's
that.
what I want to say. You've got to figure out the downstream on Rivermont because it's not 35 or 38 miles an hour. It's 40, 45, 50, and there's a ton of traffic. And there are deaths on the street right in front of my house. So I think you've done a great job on that intersection, but you got to, I mean, where are people going to, if you can't make a left onto Bedford, where are they going to go? Ruffner? Ruffner is a little residential street that has a whole lot of little houses on it, and they can't handle that volume of traffic. If they turn on Early Street, okay, but you've got to have stop signs or traffic slowers at the Rivermont Early intersection. Thank you.
Have something, because on the opposite end of Rivermont and Bedford start the signal lights. And from that point on, so you get to Boonville, have at least 7 signal lights. So that handles that flow of traffic. You have the one there at Bedford, you have the one right there at Randolph Macon, and then you have one to get to Virginia Baptist. You have that light is still there, you know, so it goes on as far as controlling the traffic. So we really need something, as Ms. Ballou was saying, at Rivermont and Early. Something slow, but somewhere in there between there and the signal light, we need to have some type of control over this traffic.
I agree. I agree. Consider the downstream, really, because what you're doing is I like the protected left turn. That makes sense. But where in the hell are people? The right lane is going to be a high, fast traffic lane, and it's already fast. It's already dangerous, and people have been killed. I mean, somebody ended up on the street, dead body on the street. The guy who was with her, you know, they're trying to take him out of the car. He's so banged up, you know, you can barely recognize him as a person. That was just one accident. The rest of them, they've all been very serious. So you've got to look downstream some. And don't turn on Ruffner. It's a little bitty neighborhood. It's just you know, people aren't going to make left turns onto Ruffner, or should.
I frequently go to Exxon, but I live on Riverside.
Right.
So I have frequently used Bedford Avenue to get back onto the next section of Rivermont to get back to Riverside. I have a car who considers herself a princess, and only Exxon gas will work. So I'm trying to figure out, where do I go? I'm going to pull into Exxon and then come out, and I can only go right, correct?
Correct.
And then you're going to do something with McDonald, but usually the safest thing for me is to go between Exxon and the other building next to it, go to McDonald, go to the stop sign and make a left onto Bedford. But you said you were going to make it one way. I don't know which way it was going, but you said you were going to make it one way. We need to safely be able to get, and the other thing is even with pedestrians, if we're going to go really fast down Rivermont, even if you have a crosswalk, it's going to be difficult to get across the street because you've compounded that traffic. So I don't know. I think you're underestimating how much people you go to Exxon, and you need to really think through how people are going to go in and out and then go back up Rivermont as opposed to going down Rivermont.
That's interesting.
Hi, my name is Stephen Kozakowski. I have a quick question for the committee, if I could. I saw the data on the accidents showing 11 accidents with 2 of them being serious in the last 6 years. Do we have the data on what times of day those serious accidents were happening and the regular accidents as well?
The police reports that get reported online have very kind of predetermined options. So you've got daylight conditions and you've got nighttime conditions, but it doesn't specifically give a time of day for those accidents.
Okay, I guess because my question was, I've lived here for the past 6 years that you showed those the data, and I hardly ever see any type of serious accidents during the daytime in regular traffic. So it almost feels to me, just as a citizen in the area, that the accidents aren't significantly happening during daytime regular traffic hours, and it might not be a traffic flow issue, but a intoxicated driver issue in the area, because when they go around those areas at high speeds coming from the bars downtown, that seems to be the time that's happening. I just fear that making these changes to major areas of thoroughfare on Rivermont are going to impede a lot of citizens. That is not a necessary thing to do. And how long is it going to take to make all these changes that you're looking at making for the acts of, 11 different accidents in a 6-year time frame? I mean, 2 serious accidents in 6 years, that's 1 every 3 years. And we're looking at like extremely changing the traffic patterns of the area based off of a few incidents. And as someone who drives on that road every day, obviously people drive faster than 35 miles an hour on there most of the time, because when there's not a lot of traffic around, that's how fast people drive. But I drive there every day and I have not seen a significant number of accidents as shown on the police report. So I'm wondering if it's a necessary burden on the citizens and a necessary cost to take for such a small number of incidents in a 6-year period.
I don't know if anyone can, I don't know if you can hear me. This is Kay Parks. I live in the same area where Martha was talking about. We've had 5 accidents in 8 months.
Yep.
And there have been, and I'm not, unfortunately, in that little block that we're talking about, everybody in our block has suffered an accident where we've had major damage, including the 2 incidents where we've had major injuries, including the fatality. Now, 5 accidents in 8 months, I think, is more than a 6 month, the 6 in the 8-year period or whatever. The buses go through there doing 50 miles an hour, including school buses. And I have done some studies on my own, and I'm not from Lynchburg. I'm from Nebraska, and Martha and we're all homeowners in that area, and I'm not even a block from the intersection of Bedford there. And I had gone back and I looked over on Alta Lane at how they did the street quieting. And I did some studies, I did some measuring, I spoke to residents over there. And I had a thought, and I measured what they had done over there. And they did a street quieting where they put a planter, and it was 30 feet long, 5 feet across. And I thought at the intersection of Early, where it would not impede traffic so much, if they put a smaller planter, not 30 feet long, of course, but something smaller where traffic could still go around it, something smaller where it would slow traffic, because right as they would get in that intersection, it would beautify the area, and it could be smaller where traffic could go around. It would not impede emergency vehicles. It wouldn't slow school buses or interfere with that, because it's not 2 lanes through there, but it would make vehicles going through that area slow down just a bit, which would slow down right in that area where we've had the highest amount of speeders. And one that intersection right there at Early, put another one at the intersection of well, they've already suggested something at Bedford, which I think is a great idea. But in the sections where there's a wider intersection where people have a tendency to go around cars, barreling through there, doing 50, 60 miles an hour and rushing through to get to who knows where, trying to go to the downtown area or coming out of the downtown area. Now, since Martha's seen an accident right in front of her house where someone was laying there, thrown out of their car and deceased. She's been a witness to that type of accident. My neighbor next to me saw the accident and called me when I was out of town, where a man flipped his truck and threw the motor out of his truck right through the back of my car.
Oh.
And I was down, and the motor landed in the front yard of her house where she and her children normally would have been coming home. My other neighbor across the street saw the vehicle land in their yard. And then since then had another truck in the last 3 weeks hit the back of their neighbor's car, totaled their car, and knocked the same vehicle, knocked their car up into their yard. So, you know, we're all the victims of major vehicle accidents 5 and 8 months. And it's all speeding, not paying attention to what they're doing. And it's not like they're just middle of the day or drunk or whatever the case may be. These are people distracted, rushing to go nowhere, and just ripping down the road because it's open and there's nothing stopping them other than the fact that there's nothing in their way and they are in a hurry to go nowhere. And no, we don't need a light. I'm not for a light, and I sure as heck don't want anything like a traffic circle. I hate those things.
Oh, no,
But-
no roundabouts, please.
Yes, but something just, one thing, a small little planter or something like that in the center would beautify the area. That's one thing. And at the same time, it would make motorists aware that there's something up there. It's going to slow them down because they're going to have to be careful and more cautious about going around that little section and that section there. And they're not going to rip around somebody that's trying to turn, because they're going to have to slow and probably stay behind them, which is going to make them slow down and wait, which is one thing that they don't seem to have a reason to do as it stands right now. They're in a hurry to rip around the person, whether they're going on the left or going the right. They'll go around them. And a lot of times people will stop and turn, and people will be crossing an intersection, and they're likely to run over somebody. They're getting off the bus, whether it's a student getting off the bus or a pedestrian getting off the bus, trying to cross. They will wait, and they'll see someone stop, and they'll go around them in a hurry for no reason. And that's
completely right. What she's describing is exactly what's happening on this block, which is 2 blocks down from this intersection you're designing. Here's what my request would be, is that your staff or you or whoever meet with us who live on this corner so you can see what the problem is, because it's a bigger problem than Bedford. I think you've done a great job on Bedford. My personal concern is that the design is going to speed up traffic. Katie's completely right. The traffic here is super dangerous and deadly. So if you would agree to meet with people who live, you know, on Rivermont by Early Street, I'd be happy to host it at my house, and you know, we're all COVID proof at this point. But we'd really like you to understand that this is a part of the Bedford problem. And so
I am, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, well, I am on the opposite side of this intersection as you head towards downtown. And we have had additional accidents all down here. At Cabell Street, at Victoria, all down the hill heading towards the bridge. And this has been an ongoing problem. The other issue that I have is with the pedestrian safety. Now, if you're on Rivermont between Oakwood and the upper end of Bedford Avenue, there are 7 lighted crosswalks for pedestrians between Oakwood Country Club and the Rivermont Post Office. The next lighted crosswalk for pedestrians is at 5th Street. And we have this high rate of speed all the way through, in addition to dangers to pedestrians, right? But it's not specific just to Early to Bedford, it's also Bedford to the bridge. I'm curious about a couple things. I put some questions in the chat. My first question was, when did you guys do the pedestrian study? Can you give me a date on that? Because our pedestrian traffic is seasonal. There are more people walking the streets in the summer than there are in the winter. And I'm rather surprised that the numbers were as low as they were.
Give me just
my second question, yeah, while you pull that up, My next question is, and I was really surprised when I went and pulled the smart scale documents on this project when I heard about this meeting, and that was all done back in 2018. But those smart scale documents show that you're routing through traffic either onto Ruffner or sending it down to Cabell and around, what is that, Botetourt or Amherst Street, in order to reach that other side, the river side, if you will, of Bedford Avenue. I'm wondering, were there any public meetings before this stuff was sent to smart scale? Because I have no recollection of public meetings about what the community wanted before this proposal was even sent. And I feel like now we're at a position where it's like, well, the money's here, and we've decided we're not going to do a lighted crosswalk. We're not going to do street lights. We're not going to do a traffic circle. We're not going to do any of that. We are limited to this because we sent it to the state in 2018, and it is what it is. But if this doesn't serve the needs of the community, and if it's not part of a larger comprehensive plan, I'm curious why we weren't looped in on this earlier. So when was the pedestrian study done? Were there any public meetings before this was sent for smart scale evaluation? And is there a larger comprehensive plan to address pedestrian safety down here all along Rivermont?
To answer the question on the pedestrian study, we did that on April 29th. So it would have been about 3 weeks ago. Typical count periods, you want to make sure that you have regular school in session. We intentionally picked a day that it was nice outside where pedestrians would be out on the crosswalks and on the sidewalks. And the primary reason for that study was to get an idea of the distribution of movement, and also so that we can do a crosswalk warrant analysis that will be part of the design process.
So April 29th, our elementary schools were back in 4 days a week, but not our middle or high schools. So we really have not seen routine full traffic flow with school in session. But again, it's during the summer when we have so many pedestrians with the kids out of school.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
Yeah, our objective for the pedestrian safety really is to focus on evaluating sight distance at all of our curb ramps, maximizing that as much as we can, because we're going to be pushing some of that on-street parking away from the intersection. That will improve sight distance. And then we've got the pedestrian island there on Rivermont, which allows a pedestrian to make a 12 to 13 foot crossing, has a protected island to wait in the middle, and then make the remaining crossing across Rivermont. And also, when we talk about traffic calming, those islands that we're putting in Rivermont are a very common traffic calm measure. When you go across now, you have about 20 feet of receiving lane. So there's not much to promote slowing down. Even if there's a car parked on the side of the road, you're still looking at about 15 to 16 feet of receiving lane. When we put the pedestrian refuge island in, that's going to increase that receiving lane down to a 12-foot width, and it's going to be striped even narrower than that. So we will see some traffic calming because of that intersection.
Well, I just wanted to piggyback in on the conversation. My name is Misha, and I live on Rivermont, feet away from where you guys are planning to do your redevelopment or whatever it is. And I've lived in this area for 9 going on 10 years. I've walked up and down Rivermont Avenue, and now I drive up and down Rivermont Avenue. I have small children who catch the bus on where the church is, and also on the other corner of Early Street as well. And I just feel like the issues that I have, along with the fatalities and the accidents that I've seen in the neighborhood, the children, that bus, the cars coming around that curb is dangerous. Absolutely. It is. The bus stops on that corner where we have to put our kids, on the bus. Nobody has mentioned the church. When the church is in session on Wednesdays and Sundays, the streets are packed. They are packed. It is ridiculous. The church doesn't have enough parking for the people that attend their ceremonies or that then attend their church. And so they use the public streets, which is perfectly okay. But you got so much traffic that's going to be going one way. You know, that is it doesn't make sense. It's ridiculous. I feel simply like when the city decides that they want to do some type of redevelopment or whatever it is they choose to do, they make those decisions. Even though you call a meeting and say, hey, we want to hear what you guys have to say, the determination, and it's already been made. It's already been made. We have a voice. We should have a voice in this community as paying citizens who have occupied these streets for years and years, who have walked and drove and invested in these homes that we live in. We are fighting a no-win battle. I feel, you know, this meeting is great. What you guys are doing is great, but the picture is way bigger than what we're talking about.
Yes.
We're
It
not
is.
discussing everything that needs to be discussed. Okay, let's take the money and figure out exactly what needs to happen. I'm not hearing that. All we're hearing is what's supposed to happen. People are always willing to say, okay, well, I don't want this to happen or that to happen, but who's always willing to speak up?
Okay, so I live with
It's ridiculous. When you walk out of your home, we've had cars on the sidewalk. I had a car, I almost hit my car on the sidewalk, car hit the neighbor's car. You can't take your kids outside. You can't play in the yard. It's already dangerous enough in Rivermont. People stealing license plates off people's cars, packages off people's porches, shooting and everything else. Now, this is one more thing we have to worry about in our neighborhood where we pay taxes, rent, and mortgage.
Now, one thing.
So is this part of a larger public discussion about safety all along this corridor, or are you all just going to do this to this intersection and think that that solves the problem?
Oh my gosh.
I'll respond to this. So this meeting is specifically about this intersection. We hear you loud and clear that you know, there's other problems in the city and along the corridor, and that definitely deserves conversation. What the forum for that is, I'm not exactly sure.
Well, have it at my house. I'm happy to invite the people that make the decisions about this and the people who are affected by this. I live at 1371 Rivermont, and I'd be happy to have you guys come, because it's, what everybody seems to be saying is, wait a minute, we're being presented with something we were not part of deciding about. And it's obvious you guys have done just a lot of work, really hard, talented work. And this was not the meeting you were expecting. I don't, I'm assuming the money can't be reallocated because you put it in for this project the way it is, and you can diddle with it a little bit, but Bedford's going to happen. But the larger problem is Rivermont. And everybody on all sides is saying this is going too fast. Would you come to my house, let's say the week after Labor Day, or not Labor Day, what is it, Memorial Day? And we'll set a time and everybody can be on the email list and be part of it. You got to come in the house and talk. I'm not going to do a Zoom meeting, but come, because we all need to be part of this.
Hey guys, I'd like to say something. I live on, I have a house on Denver Avenue. I have a house on Early Street. I own 929 Cabell Street. I have another house at the lower part of Cabell Street. And then I have a couple other investment properties also within that same area. And I've lived on I've lived in that area within 2 blocks from there for a decade, and I grew up in that area as well. So if there was an option to do absolutely nothing and leave it like it is, that's the option that I would choose. We can't say we have all of these accidents and all of these things. First of all, the people that are causing these accidents generally are driving recklessly. So that's number one. The horrible thing where the girl that died on Rivermont, which was horrendous, was due to speeding and crossing lanes and hitting somebody else at on the other side of oncoming traffic. When the vehicle flipped upside down, again, that was due to speed. I was there I literally walked to the top of the street and saw both of those. All of the other minor accidents, I mean, the discussion really has to work around the data that we have. Otherwise, we have no base for conversation. So the data that's presented to us are there's been 2 severe injuries. There's been some pedestrian injuries that have been struck, and then 11 other accidents within that have been reported. So I'm sure there's been more, but 11 other accidents that were large enough to be reported within a 6-year time frame. I don't think any of that warrants a $500,000 redo of a little intersection between Cabell Street, Bedford, and Rivermont. You know, the main issue here, first of all, anybody that lives in that area chooses to live in that area. That is a 2-way main thoroughfare to get to downtown that has, you know, Rivermont's one of the original first groups of houses within that area, and it expanded outward. That's where kind of Lynchburg started. That's one of the main, a lot of houses are on Rivermont. It connects all the way into Boonesboro, and then it connects all the way into downtown and all of the residents in between. So it's a big topic for anybody that lives in there. Do we want safety in our neighborhoods? Of course. I have a child as well. We walk, we play, we ride bikes, we go up and down Rivermont Avenue. The problem, though, is people speeding recklessly up and down Rivermont, not the people that are going 35, 38 miles an hour. So what's the fix for that? It's certainly not a stoplight at that intersection. So I commend you all for not imposing and looking at the actual data and saying that a stoplight wouldn't work. What you don't want to do is you don't want to stand on the victims, and particularly the victims that chose to drive negligently to cause accidents, and then create more law-abiding victims of the thousands of people that live within that entire area. So I would have to agree with the gentleman that was speaking earlier, and whatever gets done right there, whatever is going to impede traffic the least, because what you don't want to do is have people still driving 60 miles an hour up and down that street. And then you have a line of cars stopped that are 20 feet long, and they can't see them when they're coming around that, like Denver Avenue, Early Street, like area right there, even going down a little bit further onto Easton, and then somebody plows in, and now you have 4 or 5 cars. So stopping traffic altogether, that's not an option. That's just not an option. What made of the ones that you all presented, what made the most sense personally to me, somebody that drives there 6, 7, 8 times a day and have 10 people that work for me drive throughout that same thing, is not blocking the ways that Bedford and Cabell Street can particularly go, but and rerouting, because essentially what you're doing at that point is you're rerouting traffic into heavier residential areas with more children and families. So allowing traffic to continue to flow up and down Rivermont is if you want to put speed traps right there for police officers to patrol more, if you want to have something to keep, because if the reality is, if the speed was under control, the neighborhood and the area would be safer.
That's true.
And you can't stop traffic to do that.
Amen.
So
except that the areas of Rivermont that have stoplights have slower speeds, because traffic does in fact have to stop and then speed back up and whatnot. So long as there is no stopping between 5th Street and the upper end of Bedford Avenue, it's going to be a speedway.
Yeah.
But because of that bell curve right there, if you look at the other areas that have stoplights, when you're coming out of Bedford and you're coming out of Cabell Street, if you have a stoplight at that intersection, you're going to create such a congestion for anybody. You have to look at the amount of traffic that's flowing through there, specifically the data that they showed. The other areas of town where they have stoplights, down Randolph-Macon, down top of Bedford, and down at the post office and all that, they don't have nearly the traffic that you have at this intersection. It would create backup if you had a stoplight there. Think about how many cars drive through. If you had a stop on Rivermont right there, before it turned green, you'd have that traffic all the way back up to Easton.
Oh, I know. I've been here since 2003. And when they were doing the CSO work and we had stops at the times where they have repaved and you've had traffic stops, I know that there's backup, but the traffic has been much, much more slow during those times. And we've been here twice now when they've repaved Rivermont, plus the CSO work. So, I mean, but we've got a major thoroughfare issue that goes all the way through. My concern here again is the smart scale study. What was sent to the Commonwealth Transportation Board shows that this specifically routes traffic onto Ruffner Place, and that it specifically routes traffic around Cabell Street and, again, like I said, Amherst or Botetourt over to Bedford. All those documents are available on the smart scale application that was remitted in 2018. But again, were any of us consulted in 2018? Because I've been here almost 20 years and I don't remember any of those public meetings. Can you all advise whether there were discussions with the community before this was remitted to Commonwealth Transportation Board?
Hey, can you hear me? This is Kelly Hitchcock.
We can, Kelly.
Yeah, and I'm sure the city was gonna say this. I just wanna, just to give a little history, which I'm sure the city was about to do. The state of Virginia back in 2018 developed a pedestrian safety access plan for the entire state. They looked at some deep dive into data, and they had hot spots where there were conflict points between pedestrians and cars. And so the Rivermont intersection was not just showing up in the state of in Lynchburg City, it was showing up on a state map. And so, to credit to the city, it was a new program that the state of Virginia did not have. And frankly, I think it's a credit to the city. They saw that there was a chance to go after some state money that didn't exist prior to 2018. And so they took a leap to go after a conflict point that, again, was not just a conflict point seen in Lynchburg. It wasn't a conflict point just seen in the Lynchburg district. It was a conflict point that literally lit up on a map of the state. So, I just want to point that out. And again, so it was a new program, and the city went after it. And I think you guys have all made amazing points, and the opportunity to talk to residents to really see what's happening there. I want to just say that I think the idea of, again, we looked at some tactical urbanism, some things to maybe do to beautify, that sort of shows when things are pretty, that people slow down. So again, the traffic calming, but I just want to point out to just, again, that the city jumped on a new program that the state had just started in 2018. It didn't exist prior.
Yeah, if I can jump in here.
A little bit of clarification real quick. So the funds on this are coming from a federal level. So they are not local tax funds that are going to the improvements. So it is an increase in funds coming into the area. The study, if you look at the study that was done in 2018, it's taken from 2018 through the end of 2020 to facilitate those funds. So when we're talking about a corridor analysis or an expansion to another intersection, that's kind of a general time frame of what that might look like from the initial PER study to the funding application until the money is actually ready to start construction. So Martha, I commend the fact that you've got some ideas there on the other intersection that's north of us. But again, it's a slow process to get from those ideas to having money in hand.
So you meet with us, and then we can figure out how to solve the problem and where we're going to get the money.
So personally, I can't commit to that. It doesn't mean that I'm not willing to, but I do have your email address, and I will probably.
Memorial Day is on Monday. Why don't we do it at 6 o'clock the day after Memorial Day at my house, which is 1371 Rivermont. And I'm asking you guys from the city to come and you know, all the neighbors who are concerned about this.
So
Hey guys, I'm going to jump off here, but I just wanted to tell you I appreciate everybody's time in this project from the city, and hearing what I had to say and my opinion. And as somebody that owns 6+ properties in there, I think whatever we can do to minimize anything that you do, if you do anything, or beautification, that's great. Something to maybe speed trap, something like that. But a stoplight or something that's going to just impede traffic is just a nightmare. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you guys.
Thank you for your input. I do appreciate all this input, and I'm taking down copious notes. And again, this is going to be recorded, so the city and the design team are going to have access to all these comments. And thank you everyone who's shooting the emails as well as we're going through this. I'm not able to respond to all of those, but I will take a look at them as soon as we're done. I did also want to comment on the diversion of traffic onto Ruffner and Cable Street. That traffic is local traffic. It's not intended to be traffic that's going to be using that Bedford cut through. So these are your neighbors. They're not people that are coming through the community. And the diversion of traffic is about 5 vehicles an hour, 9 vehicles an hour. It's not a large volume of traffic. We're trying to narrow down the intersection to accommodate those large volumes of 400 vehicles an hour, so that they can go through, and adding some pedestrian safety and some traffic calming to it. So the concepts we have not really evaluated some of the more typical traffic calming measures, like planter boxes or islands that separate through traffic and on-street parking. But the pedestrian islands do kind of accommodate some of that traffic calming as well. So I just want to make sure that was clarified, and certainly don't want to cut off the discussion.
Mike, if I could jump in here. I'm Steve Timmons. I'm the facilities manager at Gospel Community Church. Lots of thoughts running through my head at the moment. The first is, you know, there was a young lady speaking earlier about how this intersection was, you know, identified at state levels as a particularly hazardous one. And I'm wondering what sort of root cause analysis may have gone into the cause of those pedestrian accidents, whether it was the nature of the intersection or whether it was, as others have noted, the speed along this corridor. Somebody else mentioned the miserable traffic that we create on Sunday mornings. I'm sorry. But my concerns of that are, you know, I've got 40, 50 parking spaces in that northeast corner lot where the basketball hoops are, we affectionately refer to as the hoops lot. We have, I don't know, another 20 or so spaces there at the corner of the cemetery across Bedford, the corner of Bedford and McDonald. And we've got more spaces behind the church that will dump out either onto Bedford, you know, towards Randolph, or onto Ruffner. I haven't seen, I've been facilities manager here for 3 years. I haven't seen any accidents at this intersection, but there have been 2 or 3 very recently coming off of Ruffner. And so I'm kind of concerned that if we're diverting traffic, you know, left turn traffic up Ruffner, which is essentially a one-lane road, that we may be creating some unintended consequences there. And the same with coming out of Cabell Street. If we're coming out of our big lot in the northeast corner. So that's one concern I've got. The other is that while this particular intersection may have been flagged, yeah, I'm retired military. I spent 30 years in the Air Force, and in the Department of Defense, and I understand how the budget process works. So I understand how fast this moves, and when we say moving at the speed of government, I know exactly what that means sometimes. But I'm kind of concerned that maybe I think there's an opportunity here to be more comprehensive in addressing. I was stunned, and she's absolutely right. I never thought about it before, but you know, there's a stoplight at the other end of Bedford, and then their next stoplight's at 5th Street, and I think that probably contributes significantly to the rate of flow through here. I have to disagree with the gentleman. I think he's gone now. You know, was claiming that the traffic along, you know, up there at the post office and by Randolph is slower because there's less traffic. Well, all the traffic coming through this intersection most likely goes through there as well. But yeah, I'm kind of concerned that maybe there's an opportunity here to do maybe a more comprehensive study as to how to make the entire road safer.
Right.
Yeah. So that's pretty much it. And I will be happy to open our building up if we want to have a meeting and not crowd up somebody's living room.
Hi, if I can jump in here.
I just feel like
my name is John Sana.
More.
I grew up in Lynchburg. I've lived on Denver the last 2 years. We've seen numerous accidents right in front of Denver. So far, none at Bedford Avenue. All of the ones have been, like several people have said, right there on the road, speed involved. I spent some time living in Nelson County. They installed a traffic light on 29. It went from having no fatalities at that intersection to having several a year. No offense to you guys, but you guys all are going to get paid, and we're going to get stuck with your mistakes for years to come. We need to make sure that the choices that you guys make are the right ones for our community. I'm a big fan of the roundabouts in Charlottesville. There's lots of good pedestrian protection measures with light up areas. That particular intersection has very poor pedestrian crossings. There's no way around it. We do need improvements there. I have small children. I love walking around with them. I do fear for them. You know, as I think a lot of people have said, you know, we want to see improvements. We're nervous that you guys are going to rush into something. It sounds like you've already picked a lot of things.
Oh, yeah.
And we're going to be paying the price for them for years and years. It doesn't matter where the money comes from. It matters what things we have to deal with on a daily basis. And I just hope you guys can kind of really weigh out. You know, I think there's a lot of good pedestrian safety measures that have come up in the last few years. And, you know, I just urge you guys to really think it over and try to weigh out stuff that's best for the community. All right. Thank you.
My name is
Kimberly. I've been living in Rivermont since 1993.
Excuse me for 1 second.
Can you hear me?
I'm gonna be real quiet. I'm Carla Hamilton.
Hello.
I'm very concerned because
I'm not understanding what's going on here.
We can hear you, ma'am. We've got 2 people speaking right now.
I'm really concerned because people on Cabell Street bound by the bridge have begged and begged and begged for something, whatever it is, to help with pedestrian crossings and getting through that intersection to make a turn on to Rivermont. And then all of a sudden we found out about this one at Bedford Avenue. But it appears to me that the whole street needs to be looked at as far as safety for children, safety for crossing, safety for getting on and off Rivermont, whether it be down by Cabell Street, down at the bottom of the bridge, whether it be at Bedford Avenue, or whether it's to slow people down at what I'm hearing is Early Street. So to me, it's like we have more than one problem, and that maybe this particular thing is going to make a heavier traffic flow going up Rivermont. And I also, again, want you to really think about people going in and out of the Exxon station. It's highly frequented by walkers and, of course, people getting gas. And I'm going to be very quiet, but I really feel like it's a bigger problem than one intersection. That's what I'm hearing. And I appreciate you. I appreciate everything that you do every day. And like I said, I'm gonna let it go.
Hey, I know we have a couple of folks from the city of Lynchburg. I know that the presentation has really been by Hurt and Profit and the other firm that was hired to study this. Sounds like there are a lot of folks who are concerned about other areas that are outside of this particular study. I don't know if some of the folks from the city of Lynchburg could chime in on just kind of, for the folks that are concerned about the other areas, other sections, that just the corridor as a whole, what are the appropriate steps of action just to kind of move forward in a positive direction for those areas, you know, because I don't want to assume that everyone knows how all this works and all the stakeholders are going to be yada, yada, yada. So I don't know if there's anyone from the city of Lynchburg that could provide some additional insight into how kind of the next steps from everyone's concerns could be handled in a constructive and proactive way.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, ma'am.
Yes. Prior to the city answering, evidently that raise hand feature is not working. It's been on since 6:30. I wanted to ask about the crosswalk on the right side. If you're looking at the option papers, was there a crosswalk option, like say coming from Exxon towards across the street? Because there was a child that got hit there decades ago, and people cross there every day. They're not going to go up to the crosswalk at the other side by the church just to come back down towards Cabell. And I absolutely oppose traffic being rerouted to Cabell Street. That cannot happen.
The streets are so narrow.
So we did.
Not only that, it's just not a good idea. It's too much traffic on Cabell Street. The bus is pedestrians crossing from the corner store over to get up to the next corner store. And pedestrian studies really should be done in summer, not only because children are out of school, but because more people in that neighborhood are outside. So I'll yield the floor for the city to answer now.
Yes, we can always address these concerns in the future. I would just, and it sounds like one of the biggest problems here is a speed issue. And I definitely have contact and meetings with the LPD at least once a week, and I can obviously bring these concerns up. Just backpedaling a little bit, this was just on the radar for this particular study for this grant that was put in 2018 at the time. So that's what just this intersection is dealing with. And the way they rate that intersection in smart scale is how many angle collisions are happening per intersection throughout the city. And again, this one showed up as a major hotspot. And so that's why it was turned into the smart scale federal program, and the VDOT and feds looked at it and they rated it, and it came out as the highest of that year in the state in 2018. And so that's what this application is merely addressing. And that's why it didn't go out to the public until now, because it's just addressing the concerns of the safety of this intersection that showed up on everybody's radar, including the state. And we can definitely address in future CIP meetings safety concerns along this corridor. And it sounds like there's need for that. You know, so I will be talking to other people that work with the city, you know, Public Works, and we can definitely talk about addressing future concerns here.
Is there any opportunity to take this feedback and to put this on pause and to evaluate and to go back to the Commonwealth Transportation Board and say, hey, listen, we've discovered this is not meeting the needs of the community as we had anticipated, and we'd like to scale it up?
If we don't use this application now, it would go back into the system and the money might not ever be available again. That's the problem with
Well, it's not, yeah, I mean, doing nothing is not going to make that intersection any safer, right? So we're going to continue to have safety issues until we do something. But, you know, how soon do we have to do something before this money disappears? Or can we just pause, have these community meetings, see if there's anything else, and do it right the first time?
Good question.
Is there a way to perhaps expand your look at traffic safety issues plus or minus a half mile from this intersection and use this money to address beyond, the four corners of these two streets? Is that possible?
Not with this specific application, we cannot. This is money that was locked in, that was given to the city and told to spend or lose it.
Okay. Oh, been there, done that. I'm just trying to see if there's some wiggle room with it.
Right, I understand.
But how much time do we have?
Well, the funds have already been allocated by VDOT to the city, and we've already gone through the preliminary engineering phase, which is basically bringing people on board to do the study and start the design process. So we can't put it back into the system now. We have to move forward or we lose all the funds.
Basically, the short answer is VDOT expects money to be spent every month from now until the project's constructed.
Right. They want to see it be.
Well, of the options you've presented, the only one that I would even consider would be option C. You have a huge sightline issue coming off Bedford Avenue, right there at Exxon, turning right onto Rivermont, and routinely people cannot see oncoming traffic on Rivermont, so they're always pulling up across that crosswalk. So even when I'm walking my dog and walking through there, I never, ever, ever take that crosswalk without swiveling a full 270 degrees to see what traffic is doing, because nobody's looking for us in the crosswalk. And in order for drivers to see oncoming traffic, they have to pull up over that crosswalk. So the first two options you presented in terms of those sight lines, that's not going to improve any pedestrian safety.
The city agrees.
But I don't even think the last option is sufficient to actually reduce the number of injuries. And that's my concern, is that we're going to come back 8 years from now and say, oh, look, we still have too many angle accidents and too many pedestrian injuries, and oh, now we need to put even more money into it, which is why I'm asking why this cannot be amended. And I went through all the documents that were put up on the Commonwealth Transportation Board. I've reviewed that information, but clearly this may not solve the issue.
I'd like to ask, have any of you guys, you five, the engineering team, have you guys tried driving through that intersection, say at like 5:30 on a weekday?
I was not driving through it, but I did place the road tubes on the road. It gives me a good opportunity to see what actual traffic is doing out on the roadway. One of the tubes was put in front of the church, kind of at that adjacent intersection, and I was actually right in front of a parked car. The other tube was placed right in front of the old firehouse.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Are you going to go ahead with this regardless? Are you going to go ahead with this regardless of what we say?
Well, that's why we're bringing it to you, to see how we can adapt what we are doing. This is a conceptual phase. And so these three options are not set in stone, but this is, the work has to be done at this intersection with the funds that VDOT gave us that we must spend. So it's only involving this intersection, this specific intersection.
Well, it sounds like you have already made your decision.
Well, no, what I'm saying is the actual, the amount of and type of collisions made that decision when it went into the smart scale system. They determined that this intersection was the worst in the area. Like I said, it scored the highest in the state. And so then, therefore, they decided to go ahead with this application and fund this intersection. So now we're asking and talking with you and seeing how we can tweak this design in this intersection based on the concerns that you bring to us.
One of my concerns is
at a
not
specific
enough
location. But what we're getting from this is we're getting a lot of feedback. Like some of the major comments we received so far is one resident who pulls a trailer through the intersection. Can we accommodate the trailer? The questions about the access to the Exxon station, the church traffic that's leaving the parking lot. Can we accommodate all of those maneuvers within the intersection? So we haven't really locked into anything, and even the concepts that we're presenting today are all kind of piecemeal concepts where I can take a crosswalk from this side and a curb ramp from this side and put them together to accommodate the residents for what's needed. And we're also seeing that broader range of concerns, whether it's the traffic being diverted on Cable Street. We do have a large number of mid-block crossings where people are coming across between the intersections right in front of the Exxon. So the value of this meeting is getting to hear some of the design stuff that maybe I didn't catch when I drove the corridor 3 times or put down the road tubes, or that my people didn't catch while they were counting the pedestrians. So the value of this on our end is great. We are just kind of constrained on how much flex we have in the design and the scope of the project.
I had a question about how many cars are able to get in the exit lane, especially if you have a situation where there are a number of cars that are waiting to make a turn, and so you have stopped traffic. What happens with the lane that is designed to bypass those that are waiting to get into the exit lane?
So currently the configuration on that northbound approach on Rivermont is what we call a tweedle, that little left-hand turn lane that goes both directions, and it kind of serves as a left turn lane for storage. And that configuration is going to remain. The channelizing islands are really just better defining those movements and restricting some of the minor movements that maybe only 2 or 3 people make in the course of an hour. So that storage should still remain the same as it is currently. Does that answer the question that was asked, or answer the question that was asked?
Yes, there was one other question that I wanted to ask in regard to that. Was there any kind of software or any kind of anything that you may have had where you could see a virtual reality of what it looks like for traffic to flow through those areas like that?
We use
some kind of animated.
Go ahead.
Some kind of animated, video or something that you all might have been able to look at to see what that movement looks like once you put it in place?
We do have some simulation software that can show, like, it's very rough models of cars moving through the intersection, but it wouldn't graphically represent all the channelizing islands that we're putting in. We would use it to calculate the anticipated length of that queue, just trying to make sure that it doesn't queue through that previous intersection.
And the reason why I asked is because, as someone mentioned earlier, I believe, once you put this in concrete, apparently it's going to be quite difficult to make adjustments.
It would, yes.
Okay. My last question is, looking at when you all did the feasibility study for this, I didn't see anything really representing, you may have spoken to it, but I didn't hear anything or see anything date-wise, representing the amount of activity that has increased over the past year or within 2021. Would you have done anything differently with your plan based on the last 6 to 9 months?
You mean as far as crash data?
Yes, the way it's structured with the traffic flow and accidents or incidents that have transpired. And also, you also have a church that has significantly increased the amount of traffic that comes into that corner. Would you have done anything differently or added anything based on the feasibility within the past 9 months?
The only way to evaluate that would be to go back through the full PER process with an analysis, which would take about 5 to 6 months, especially now that we're coming up to summer. So I don't know that that would have much of an impact on the types of accidents or the types of solutions that were recommended at the intersection. But VDOT, when it comes to reporting their crash data, it tends to come out about 6 to 9 months after it happens. So what we have access to right now only goes through 2020.
Okay, there happen to be a pastor within a few blocks of that particular intersection.
Bill, are there any more questions that were typed into the question box that that haven't been addressed?
There are a number of questions. These questions will be recorded. So if you feel like a question wasn't answered, we will be able to respond to them after the meeting. If anyone feels like there was a question that you typed in the questions box, but we didn't answer that, feel free to either type it again or voice the question.
Will there be additional public meetings, or was this it? Because it's clear that there's much more discussion to be had, but are there actual plans to have additional public meetings, or do we need to put those together?
I think for this phase, this was intended to be the primary meeting. We had identified some issues that we thought might come up in this meeting that haven't necessarily come up, and had anticipated some more one-on-one discussions, maybe with the residents or the businesses right at the intersection. As far as any broader corridor study, that would all have to be handled as a different set of public discussions. And I think the city has already kind of commented that they do have a process to hear those concerns and have those voiced. Ryan, would you say that's an accurate representation of what you said?
Yes, typically we have one meeting, and that's what we're required to have anytime we use any type of federal funding and VDOT funding. We can definitely take more questions, especially or emails about this project, and try to address those concerns that way.
And for me personally, since I'm the designer and I'll oversee the construction, the biggest comments that are going to impact this project are going to be based off those 3 concepts or issues that are between Cable Street and Ruffner, things that I can address within the funding source And my email's up there on the screen, so certainly I'm happy to see those and be able to discuss those as we move from conceptual to what we call a 60% plan submittal. But I mean, I'm kind of restricted on what I can actually work on just because of the funding source. But we want to make sure that within that funding source, we're accommodating all of those comments, or as many of those comments as can be accommodated.
Right.
At the very least, will you guys reevaluate the pedestrian study? I mean, we know that school was not in session full time, and we also know that most of the pedestrian traffic is in the summer. So can we at least get a commitment that that pedestrian data would be redone, knowing now that that's not a full picture?
So the minimum threshold that we were looking at for the pedestrian study was met. Our biggest concern was that we would not count enough pedestrians to meet that minimum threshold. The comment that came up about the mid-block crossings, I think we need to speak with the city more about how we can possibly eliminate those. I know that part of the initial concept was to see whether or not we could warrant a mid-block crossing, but as we see through the comments, we really need to try to restrict those to marked crosswalks wherever possible. And if that means we're making some better accommodations on the south side of the project, then I think we need to evaluate that as well. But I don't know that we need to recount because we have met what we need. We've certainly shown that not everybody is crossing at the crosswalks, and that is a substantial number of the pedestrians that are coming through. And we don't have any concerns of VDOT requesting that we remove any crosswalks or remove any pedestrian accommodations. Does that answer your question?
No, I mean, I understand that you had to, as part of the project, do a pedestrian study, which is why I asked when it was done. And when you told us you want to do it schools and all of these other things, and yet, again, like you didn't get a full picture. So even though it's not required by VDOT, wouldn't that be a prudent thing to do as part of this plan to make sure that we're getting it right? If the primary concern here is pedestrian safety in addition to the angled accidents, if those are our two major things, then we probably need a better picture of the pedestrian flow.
Well, I would say that as a scalable view, we've got a pretty accurate view of where the pedestrians are crossing. So our concern is accommodating those in our design.
I've seen so many small children run cat-a-corner across that intersection from the hoops parking lot, if you will, where those basketball courts are, directly to the Exxon. And it has scared the dickens out of me. And I don't see that reflected in the data you collected in April, because I see that primarily happening during the summer when the kids are out of school.
Okay. The only way really to accommodate that movement would be with a traffic signal that has an all red phase. So what we're trying to do is create better and more protected crossings that can be utilized to get over to that corner.
Well, hopefully that'll add a crosswalk on the other side as well. I'm not sure how that wasn't factored into the pedestrian study. There's a lot of crossing on the Exxon side.
Correct, and that's where I thought that comment was originating. The study, if you look back at that slide, we had 35 people who went across in between Cable and Bedford, not at one of the crosswalks. We had looked at a crosswalk that would go from that corner perpendicular to the Exxon, but then that becomes a mid-block crossing, which is going to be less safe, and it's about a 58-foot crossing. and we don't have any means of providing a refuge in the middle unless we completely cut off.
You're saying it's going to be less safe, but you do realize that's what's happening now all the time. At least the markings in the street would alert the drivers to pay more attention, but sometimes pedestrians do have, rights to cross. If you could just consider that.
All right, we'll take a look at it again. Like I said, our initial concept included some of those, but trying to accommodate it with the turning movements at the intersection was a little difficult, and we were, again, backing up traffic in order to accommodate those movements. So the other option that I'm looking at right now is actually looking back at Cable Street and looking at why is the residential crossing not occurring back there at Cable Street as opposed to coming halfway up the block and across. And
I can tell you why I do that.
Go ahead.
For myself, because it's safer to cross there and then cross over at Monsview, which is a little bit of traffic, than to cross even Cabell from the store to the other sidewalk, going up the middle of the block at Bedford Ave, where the child was hit last time. It's too much right there. You've got to watch from four different angles, plus the store exits they're both in the middle of the block. So for me, I cross at Cabell and Monsview and walk up Bedford.
Well, and that was my question. Why? Because I would expect, with all the residential being south of that aside from a few shoppers coming directly out of a store and walking across, that there wouldn't be that many mid-block crossings between Cable and Bedford.
I think the younger crowd goes that way.
Okay.
Traffic is slower. Traffic is slower as you approach Bedford Avenue because you at least have traffic that's just turning onto Rivermont and picking up speed. By the time they get to Monsview and Cabell, they're at 40 miles an hour.
Okay.
Or they're getting close to it. And so it's actually safer to walk a little bit closer to the intersection where traffic is slower. I mean, once you get down past Bird Street, I mean, it's 50 miles an hour routinely. And so, yeah, I mean, in terms of crossings, there are no, and by the way, those painted crosswalks right there at Bedford are the last ones before 5th Street. There's not another even painted crosswalk between Bedford Avenue, where we're talking about, and the other side of the bridge.
Correct.
Hey, Mike, got a question for you.
Yes, sir.
I live on the Rivermont on the Firehouse side. I know that the study was basically for Bedford to Rivermont. The state recognized it. But as part of the evaluation, did you look at the impact that will be at Cabell and Rivermont as far as increased traffic? When we leave, we never make a left off of Bedford onto Rivermont heading downtown. We go around the block down Amherst, cut over to Cabell, and then try to make a left out of there. But even currently, that's almost as risky as doing it at Bedford because of limited visibility, the speed. You have people coming out of the convenience store right there. You have people parked on the right in front of the buildings. It's almost just as difficult. So when y'all did the study, have you looked at the impact that it's going to have, or are we just moving the problem from one intersection to another one? Thanks.
Well, I did not do the traffic study. The traffic study was done by another firm back in 2018. They did analyze the impacts of, again, that local traffic being diverted around the grid because we're cutting off those left turns. But the process that I have been through is just looking at the results of that study and trying to work out the geometrics of how we provide some pedestrian accommodations at the intersection, and when, where, and how the pedestrians are moving across, and then accommodating those southbound and northbound lefts onto Bedford Avenue.
No, appreciate that. Appreciate the work you've done. But again, I'm really concerned that we're just moving it from one intersection down to the next one. And if you haven't been back there, driven around behind on Amherst Street, it's actually hard to get on the Cabell. They have a telephone pole right there on the corner. So if you're trying to go around the block, it would be easy to sideswipe your vehicle. Plus, there's vehicles that are parked on that road. It's just really narrow, not conducive for traffic movement. And I think that this whole thing is moving it from one intersection to another.
Right, and I did drive through that grid when I was out there just for that reason. When you start adding on-street parking, especially if there's no restrictions near the corners and you've got narrow residential streets, it becomes very difficult to make those maneuvers, especially if you're making multiple turns to get to where you want to be. I don't know that it would be accurate to say we're moving the problem to Cable. And I keep saying Cable. I was told that's how it's pronounced, but it sounds like it's Cabell. But
no harm.
Go ahead.
I said no harm, no foul.
But we are certainly moving some of those residential movements, either northbound and then coming back the other way, or working their way around through that local grid. Again, we're talking less than 10 vehicles an hour during the peak times, so as few as 2 or 3 during the non-peak times. But the majority of the traffic, and we're talking like 80% of the traffic to the magnitude of 300 and 400 per hour, is making that left-hand turn at Bedford Avenue, or that right-hand turn coming back onto Rivermont, that we're trying to accommodate at that intersection to make sure that that bypass traffic primarily is not being diverted onto the local roads or those residential streets.
Okay, thanks for answering.
Yeah, until Sunday morning when we have 20 or 30 cars trying to make that left-hand turn off of Cabell Street a couple of times in the morning.
Correct. And the comment on the church parking in traffic is actually a very interesting perspective on it. Because the study, when we do traffic studies, we intentionally avoid Sundays, because unless you're at a church location or a church access, there's very little impact to the roadways. The times that we see a majority of traffic is Tuesday to Thursday, during that morning rush hour and evening rush hour, and sometimes around lunchtime. So the analysis that was done in 2018 would not have accommodated any of those church movements.
Right, and in
Well, and that
2018, where, depending on what month in 2018, up until September or October, the previous occupants of that building, it was a very small congregation, and then October, November timeframe, they merged with Gospel, or we merged with them. And now we've got 1,000 attendees when school's in session and we don't have COVID and all that other stuff. And it may not be a huge deal, because I don't know what, and it wasn't in the study, I don't know what your north-south traffic count is on Rivermont on Sunday morning. I'm sure it's less than Tuesday evening. I don't know how much less. So the risk may cancel itself out because of fewer opportunities for somebody to run into you making a left-hand turn on the Rivermont.
The study counts were done in October of 2017, and then they use a standard growth rate to bring them up to the current year. So the study was projected out to 2038 when they did the analysis. So, and once you get a certain number of years away from your actual traffic counts, it starts to get a little more theoretical, where you're dealing more with percentages of movements than actual movements. But that was the methodology used in the study.
Do you have any idea what just based on any other study, what Sunday morning traffic flow on Rivermont through that intersection is?
I don't know that I would have a good guess for that. Again, unless I'm doing a study specifically for a church, I typically wouldn't account for Sunday traffic. I would expect the through movements to be substantially less. I don't know that I would say 25, 30% less, but definitely less than what we see during the peak hours of the week.
Okay.
Actually, when we did the speed study, we actually put those tubes out on the road. Those tubes report the time and movement of every vehicle. So I should be able to go back and get the breakdown of that Sunday traffic compared to weekday traffic from those tube counts.
Well, and those tubes were damaged, the ones that were placed at the church, at least for part of that study, because I called it in. You know, you place 2 tubes down so you can gauge speed, but at some point one of those tubes tore loose.
They were.
And I contacted the city.
And I got to tell you, I have, aside from a snowplow, I've never seen a tube destroyed like that. But we did, what we did is we took that study analysis and we get all the raw data of every vehicle and the speed that it's traveling. And at the point where those tubes broke, we stopped getting good data, and it was jumping from like 3 miles an hour to 180 miles an hour. And then once they fully severed, we could tell where we were no longer getting data. So we eliminated all of that. But I think we had a full week of traffic counts before those tubes got broken.
And you said the previous traffic study that had been submitted with this to Commonwealth Transportation Board was actually conducted in 2017 before the church changed over?
The traffic counts were done in 2017, yes.
And it's not just Sundays. I mean, and no offense to the church, I mean, but clearly there were evenings where there was worship service. There were evenings, you know, Christmas Eve, I remember traffic was quite a mess. And you're going to have some of those throughout the year, 1 or 2 holidays here or there. But even the current traffic study doesn't show the church at full capacity with weekday events as well happening in the evening. We're missing a lot of information here, and yet we're being presented with 3 very fixed plans.
They certainly had a lot of good input and feedback today. I know we were originally slated to go to 7:30, but of course, you know, as long as there's interest, we kept going. I guess as we work our way towards winding down here, I want to point out the information on the screen here. This recorded webinar will be available on the city's website, as we said earlier. Mike's email is there for additional questions. And I guess just one last opportunity here. If anybody has a final question or comment, then we'll look to wrap up.
Well, thank you guys and gals for putting this on and taking your time in the evening to present this to us. It's not always fun, I know, but your efforts are appreciated.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I would be very, and I hear on the call, I think there's a lot of interest for a broader neighborhood meeting before this proceeds, and in person with representatives of the city, whether that's held at one of the churches or whether that's held, you know, in a private home. But clearly people are not happy.
Okay, well, any final remarks from the panel here? Close out. Okay. Well, hearing none, I want to thank you all for your time tonight and coming out. And please stay tuned for more information. And again, there'll be more information on the website. And I think we'll call it a wrap. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.